So Stream Guys, they're great. They get it out to you. LV.net, they get it to me, and that lets me get it to you. And, of course, Peter Eberhardt, our sales guy. So that's all the thanks, I think. Go to artbell.com. Now, why am I telling you to go to artbell.com? Because we have a photograph there of how the White House is going to look about a year after Mr. Trump is elected. You might want to take a look at that. By the way, I'm going to be on the Tom Leykis show tomorrow. They have invited me to come and be part of whatever it is they do there, and it's some strange stuff, I guess. So I should fit right in. That'll be fun. That'll be at 4 o'clock Pacific tomorrow. All right, so we've got this barnacle-encrusted wing part, which Boeing is saying, yep, part of a 777. Really could only be part of that 777 because it's the only one that's crashed out there. Can they trace it back and see where it really went down, if it went down on the line that they have, that curved line? I don't know. That's a reach, I think, for modeling. Anyway, they also picked up a suitcase today, a suitcase that belonged to perhaps somebody on that ill-fated flight. The mainstream thinking, the mainstream talking head people, is what I should say, still think that it was a man-done deal. And it probably was. It made an awful lot of turns. NBC ran a very interesting article on China. 700 successful cyber attacks on the U.S. this last year. Maybe we should get hold of Anonymous. I do have that contact, you know. And they should fight China. They could probably do it. I'm not sure how the NSA is doing, but maybe my friends at Anonymous really could make a difference. And one other story, and then we'll get to our guest who's going to be really something, Dr. Dvorak. I'll get to that in a moment. A swarm of UFOs, and this is on Artbell too, artbell.com. A swarm of UFOs have been caught on camera by many, many, many in Japan's port city of Osaka. The footage, which has been viewed by about 9,000 people now, so it's pretty young. It's released on a Japanese YouTube channel as well. Spherical objects glowing white can be seen flying across the sky in the low-quality video. I'm sorry about that. And some users have speculated they are evidence of ET life. Well, who knows? But the Japanese UFO sighting seems eerily similar to one in London, where concert goers there witnessed a bright group of lights overhead in Hyde Park. So these are mass sightings. I mean, it's not like one or two people. This is many, many, many people seeing all this. Coming up in a moment, Dr. John Dvorak. He received his Ph.D. in planetary geophysics from the California Institute of Technology in Pasadena. That was followed by working for the U.S. Geological Survey on earthquakes and volcanoes, including the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens, other eruptions in Hawaii, Alaska, Italy, Central America, and Indonesia. They get big ones. Currently, Dr. Dvorak operates one of the largest telescopes at the summit of Mauna Kea in Hawaii. Hope I got that right. His professional interests include the question of scientific evidence for life beyond planet Earth and whether the multiverse exists. So this is going to be a lot of fun. So coming up in a moment, Dr. Dvorak, stay right where you are. You're listening to Midnight. Hang in there. We'll let you know when it's time. Let's go all the way to Hawaii and Dr. Dvorak. Doctor, welcome to Midnight in the Desert.
Well, hello, Art. It's great to be here tonight.
It's great to have you. Anybody with your credentials is always great to have on the program. And you've got such a wide range of cool stuff you want to talk about. I'm going to start sort of all backwards a little bit and start with the movie San Andreas, because I took my family to see that fairly recently, and, I know that it was all CGI. I know it was all fake, but I'm telling you right now, I was on the edge of my seat taking deep breaths through that whole movie. It just absolutely stunned me. It looked so real.
Well, I agree with you. I enjoyed the movie a great deal too.
Really?
But one thing that you might be surprised about is that the ground shaking that they showed in the movie is not nearly as strong as it will actually be.
Oh, God.
Because if you recall, for example, when they're on top of the dam.
I object to that. Can you tell me about that before we move on? I do recall when they were on the dam. I objected to the dam getting slammed right away before it all began in California. Is that likely?
Well, it's not likely for the dam to break up. But what I wanted to point out is that during that first earthquake, people are running around.
Yes.
And the ground is going to shake so fast that it's impossible to run. You'll actually be down on the ground.
That have been falling down.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And so there isn't any possible. It's not possible for people to be standing or running around during one of these big earthquakes.
So the ground is either moving up and down or laterally or both.
Both. And the reason you can't run around is the acceleration is more than 1g. So there are going to be times when you are actually in free fall, and then just a fraction of a second later, you'll be under an acceleration of 2g's or more.
Wow. Again, I guess I just object to so many movies of this kind, generally destroying Las Vegas or its environs first. And here they did it again, and boy, there went the dam. But that, of course, was just the first step. It was the beginning of what became really horrible.
Well, that's right. And there are earthquakes out there. There's an earthquake zone that runs pretty much from Reno to Las Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
And it can have rather large earthquakes,
mm-hmm.
not as large as the San Andreas, but you can have magnitude 7+ earthquakes there. The latest one was about 1872.
Okay. Maybe you can look back in records. I live in the little town called Pahrump, Nevada. We're about 65 miles west of Las Vegas, and we're 6 miles from the California border. And a few years ago, we had a 7.3 in the desert. And let me tell you, Doctor, I've got a 100-foot radio tower over my house, and I was sure that piece of steel was going to come cutting through the house like a knife through hot butter, you know?
Right.
It was a big earthquake, really.
Right. That was a Hector mine earthquake that occurred out in the desert, and that was a magnitude 7+ earthquake.
7.3.
That's right.
They said, yes.
And if it had occurred in a place like Reno or Las Vegas or up and down the coast, there would have been major destruction and fatalities.
If you sort of look, this is very selfish, but if you look where I am I on a big earthquake fault, or is it?
You're in the zone.
I'm in the zone.
There's a zone that's known as the Walker Seismic Zone. It's
mm-hmm.
named after the first Westerner to go in Yosemite National Park. It wasn't a park then, but he was the first one to see it. And the Walker Seismic Zone is about 600 miles long, about 100 miles wide, and it pretty much runs down the border between California and Nevada, between Reno and Las Vegas.
All right. Well, then here's one other selfish question, then we'll move on. There are two types of dirt in the area where I live. One is what we locally call poof dirt, and it's really soft. It's almost like sand. I mean, some people have trouble with houses sinking a little bit into it, or more than a little. And then we have the opposite. Where I live here, we have it's almost like cement below me. It's called caliche, and it's kind of like rock-like, actually. So if an earthquake did happen here, would I rather be in the sandy place or the rocky place?
Oh, you'd much rather be in the rocky place, on the caliche. On the caliche is an old soil where salts have leached into it, and that's what makes it so hard.
Uh-huh.
And in terms of earthquakes, it's better to be on solid ground instead of very loose ground.
Got it. All right. Now, going for a second back to the movie, then, of course, the rest of the movie happened, and there became an earthquake up and down San Andreas virtually all the way. For all the moviegoer, and I know a lot of people saw this movie, is such a thing even possible, Doctor?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes, it is possible.
I thought you were going to say no.
This is the scenario that people worry about a great deal. To back up a little bit, in the last few decades, one of the things we've learned about earthquakes is that they are not random and they don't reoccur like clockwork. But large earthquakes seem to come in clusters, and they are called earthquake storms. And I'd like to turn your attention over to what is probably the most famous earthquake storm. It occurred in Turkey. Along a fault right along the northern edge of Turkey, on the edge of the Black Sea.
How long ago?
From 1939 to 1999.
Wow.
That's 60 years. There were 13 major earthquakes. 13. And people have often seen an analogy between that and the San Andreas. And that does get, that is a very big concern.
A gigantic concern, considering that's like 1/6 of our economy in California.
Well, that's right. And so that's 13 major earthquakes in 60 years, or roughly about one every 4 or 5 years. It's like having, if you recall, well, like the earthquake that you had in 99, the Hector Mine earthquake.
Yes.
Or the Northridge in 94, north of Los Angeles.
Right.
Or the Loma Prieta, also known as the World Series earthquake in 1989.
Remember it, yes.
What happened in Turkey were 13 earthquakes like that or larger. And so the San Andreas system, everybody I've ever talked to, including myself, see that as an analogy. So it is possible.
Okay, well, San Andreas has been suspiciously silent, quiet.
That's right. There happens to be a seismic lull right now going on in California. And it's been going on pretty much since the 1906 earthquake. For example.
Is that good or bad? Oh, well, I mean, it's good immediately as of the now.
It's all in one's perspective about good or bad. It's nature. And my philosophy is I accept nature on its terms because I really don't have a choice, first of all.
Okay, well, let me reframe the question. It's been quiescent, it's been so silent, but somehow under the ground I have this mental picture of two things pressed up against each other, trying to move, trying harder to move, and they've been trying for a while now, and then when they do move, they're really going to boogie.
Well, that's right. And the two things which are pushing against each other, I think most people are familiar with the tectonic plates.
Right.
That the outer part of the planet has a dozen or more plates that are moving very slowly. And where they come together, they're stuck. And they sort of grind against each other. Right. And the only way of releasing this is by a big earthquake. And so it's inevitable. There's going to be large earthquakes. The question is when. And it just happens to be that during the great urban expansion in California, from 1920s to the 1970s,
sure,
that was an extremely quiet period in terms of earthquakes. And that can't persist. And we are getting the first signs that it's starting to pick up.
Well, when you look around,
an illustration.
Well, you may. Go ahead.
From about 1840, when the first records are kept. So from about 1840 to 1906, there were about 15 magnitude 5.5 or larger earthquakes in California. That's 15 over a period of about 70 years. The next 70 years, there was only one. And in the last 35 years, I think there's been 5. And so it was really quiet throughout most of the 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
And we are getting an increase of magnitude 5.5 and larger earthquakes, but we still aren't up to the 7s and 8s.
And even worse, I guess, is it before again the movie, what is the largest earthquake possible?
Well, the largest one on the planet would be somewhere in the mid-9s, like what happened in Japan,
right?
Or happened in Sumatra,
right?
And what is going to happen up in Washington and Oregon.
Oof.
But in California, the largest one is about an 8.2. Now that is still a huge earthquake that's going to cause a lot of havoc and destruction and fatalities.
Particularly if the epicenter is under some nearly populated area.
That's right. Now the San Andreas, the only mega city that it goes through is the Bay Area. It goes north of Los Angeles, but there are certainly many splinters of it that run through Los Angeles, like the Hollywood Fault.
Right.
I mean, if you ever go to Hollywood, everyone stands at Hollywood and Vine.
Sure.
And you look north, and you see that round building of
That's right.
Capitol
Records. Yes.
You look beyond that, and Vine Street makes a ramp up. That's the Hollywood Fault.
Most movies destroy that building, by the way.
That's right. It's a very convenient building.
I guess it is, and it's a landmark. But in reality, it's close, huh?
A few hundred feet away from the Hollywood Fault.
Holy moly. Okay. So something in the 8+ is possible in these areas, and certainly up in the San Francisco Bay Area, huh?
Oh, yes. And not just the San Andreas. People are very concerned about the HOUR1 Fault. That runs from just about San Jose up through Fremont and Oakland and
Actually,
Berkeley.
there's a lot of recent concern about the HOUR1.
Yes. In fact, there was a felt earthquake there just a few weeks ago.
Did you say a felt earthquake?
Yes, it was a magnitude 4.
Okay.
So people felt the shaking, but I don't think there was any destruction. But the reason people are also concerned about HOUR1, the last major earthquake was 1868. There was about 24,000 people lived in the East Bay. Today, there's over 1.2 million people live in the East Bay.
All right. We don't have a movie for people, but if there were a 8.3 or 4 earthquake in the San Francisco Bay Area, what should we expect?
Well, during the earthquake, you won't be able to walk around. The best thing when you start feeling the shaking is to get under a desk or something, and it's just drop and hold on to it, and it's going to shake for 1, 2, maybe for 3 minutes.
That'll feel like an eternity. The one I felt went for about 45 seconds, and I thought it was forever. You know, the 7.3 you mentioned.
Well, that's right. If we go back to the World Series earthquake, 1989, I talked to a Stanford professor who felt it, and he said, I'm well educated. I know everything about earthquakes. But this thing shook for only 12 seconds, and I thought it was an eternity.
Right.
I thought it was never going to stop.
Okay, so, I mean, what people...
And then what happens after it is important.
Well, yeah, there you go. San Francisco, after something of that magnitude, what's left?
Well, there'll be no running water. There'll be no electric power. There'll be no transportation. And there'll be no communication with the cell phones.
Well, that just about rips all of it.
Cope.
That rips about all of it. I mean, if all of that is gone,
that's right, and people will have to cope, depending on the areas. If you're in an outer area, maybe like 20 miles or more, things will probably be out for just a few hours. If you're down in the major shaking, it could be down for weeks.
All right. the Circle of Fire, the Ring of Fire, whatever you want to call it, there's sure been an awful lot of action on the rest of it. I mean, Japan, off Indonesia, really big stuff. And, you know, you see that begin to happen. Usually it seems like it comes on around, then something happens in South America, and then it seems to come north. Maybe I'm all wrong about that, but it feels like that. And for some reason, a lot of Asia has been really catching it big time, as you know, and the West Coast, not so much.
Well, that's right. Again, if an earthquake happens in Japan, it doesn't have any immediate effect on the west coast of North or South America.
Right.
But it does have a regional effect, and that's where this concept of earthquake storms come from. So there isn't any global increase of activity, but you can have a regional increase of activity that'll last decades, which is pretty much a lifetime.
So it could start up, for example, tomorrow in California, and it could keep going for years.
That's right, for decades. As another example, you probably remember what happened in Sumatra.
Yes, I do.
Well, that was not just an isolated earthquake. That was actually part of an earthquake storm. Sumatra was very quiet in terms of earthquakes for over 100 years. And then in 2001, there was the first magnitude 8 earthquake, and they have now had six in 14 years.
It was horrible. The tsunami from it was horrible.
That's right, and so that's why there's this concern about what seismologists call Cascadia, which is the place of Washington and Oregon. That has been very quiet. Very little seismic activity for 200 years.
Well, I have a lot of listeners up in that area right now. What would you say to them?
So what the concern is that there will certainly be a large earthquake, but there'll probably be a series of large earthquakes. And once they start, they'll probably go on for a couple decades and then stop again.
Would you imagine people saying, I've had enough after about 2 or 3 and just moving out of the area? A lot of people do.
Yes, they do. I had a very good friend who was in the World Series earthquake, the Loma Prieta earthquake, 89. And after 2 days of aftershocks, he said, I finally yelled out, stop this. When is this going to stop? But remember, on these large earthquakes, these will be spaced most likely over a period of many years. So it's not like one today and then one next week and another week. Though it's possible, it's more likely it'll be spaced out.
Still very little comfort after you've just had one.
Well, that's right. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and it's a beautiful place, and I would live there with the earthquakes. I have no problems
You would.
that.
Okay, well, that's an endorsement. Doctor, hold on. We're at a break point.
For Dark Matter News, I'm Leo Ashcraft. Witnesses say 3 people were performing an exorcism in a Texas public park on Thursday morning.
Started getting louder and louder and louder. I think she was on the ground, and they were standing over her with hands on her, screaming, Satan, I demand that you depart. You've been, and it just went on and on and on.
That's the reaction from one bystander after what eyewitnesses are calling an exorcism. It has also concerned the local clergyman, Father Dave Hawksley.
My overriding thought in that is I hope that the people who were doing it had some level of training.
He describes exorcism as the removal of an evil spirit through the use of prayer and originates from the gospel of Jesus.
The person who they're exorcising, that person's getting the care that they need.
Police say they were called to the scene, but since it's not illegal to perform an exorcism in a public place, they did not take action. No injuries were reported. A Hillview man has been arrested after he shot down a drone flying over his property, but he's not making any apologies for it. It happened Sunday night at a home in Bullitt County, Kentucky. Hillview police say they were called to the home of a 47-year-old William Meredith after someone complained about a firearm. When they arrived, police say Meredith told them he had shot down a drone that was flying over his house. The drone was hit mid-air and crashed. Well, we might be a little closer to interplanetary travel after scientists have recently confirmed that an electromagnetic propulsion drive, which is fast enough to get to the moon in 4 hours, actually works. The EM drive was developed by the British inventor Roger Schawyer nearly 15 years ago, but was ridiculed at the time as being scientifically impossible. It produces thrust by using solar power to generate multiple microwaves that move back and forth in an enclosed chamber. This means that until something fails or wears down, theoretically the engine could keep running forever without the need for rocket fuel. The drive, which has been likened to Star Trek's impulse drive, has left scientists scratching their heads because it defies one of the fundamental concepts of physics, the conservation of momentum, which states that if something is propelled forward, something must be pushed in the opposite direction. So the forces inside the chamber should cancel each other out. In recent years, though, NASA has confirmed that they believe it works. And this week, Martin Tajmor, a professor and chair for space systems at Dresden University of Technology in Germany, also showed that it does produce thrust. Now, you know how it is. You're swinging a hammer around, having heaps of fun, and you stumble across your very own personal bat cave. Except it's not a bat cave. It's an entire city. While redoing his house in 1963, a man in Nevşehir province of Turkey, in an area known as Cappadocia, knocked down a wall. Behind that wall was a tunnel, and behind that tunnel there was an underground city. What he had stumbled across was one of the many hidden entrances to the ancient underground city of Derinkuyu. This was an entire city carved into the stone below Cappadocia, reaching some 60 meters below. It had 18 levels. It had it all: residences, churches, food storage, wineries, and even a school. It was designed to house some 20,000 people as well as livestock. It features vents to the surface and several discrete entrances. This all suggests that the city was built as a precaution to protect the people during times of war or natural disaster. Cities like these were used during times of Christian persecution, so religious items would be placed on the lowest levels for protection. The city was also used as a refuge from the Mongolian invasion in the 1300s and up through the 20th century for Christian people fleeing persecution. It was finally abandoned for good in 1923. After its rediscovery, the city opened it to tourists in 1969. Today, about half the city is available to the public. I'm Leo Ashcraft for Dark Matter News.
Welcome back, Doctor.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so how does one know if you're at the beginning of an earthquake storm or just a one-off event?
One doesn't know. That's the unfortunate part. There's no way of knowing if it's the beginning of a storm. However, once you get a large earthquake, you can get a better idea that more are going to come in the very near future. For example, I mentioned Sumatra.
Yes.
There's been an earthquake storm going on there since 2001. And there's been 6 major earthquakes. And people have said there'll be at least 2 more. Now, these next 2 could easily be 40 years from now, or they may be occurring now. But people are confident that it's not over.
Okay, Doctor, we've got a worldwide audience, so I've got a couple of questions for you that just came in on the computer. I get these things as we go on with the show. Richard in Japan asks, Art, question for your guest. I live in Yokohama, and there are some small earthquakes and volcanic activity happening right now, right here. Could Mount Fuji erupt again?
Well, Mount Fuji will certainly erupt again, but what you're seeing now is not an indication of a run-up to an eruption of Fuji.
Comforting.
Mount Fuji was very active until 1707. And so that's now been over 300 years that it's been quiet. But it will erupt again. But what this listener is feeling and seeing is not a run-up to an eruption.
Just a small flurry of quakes there in Yokohama?
Yes. Yeah, because part of the problem is there's always this small flurry of earthquakes, and we've never been able to sort out which ones are the actual lead-up and which ones are just background.
Gotcha. All right, then there's Robert, and he wants to know, ask please about the New Madrid Fault for all of us here in the southwest Missouri area.
Yes, one of the largest earthquakes in the history of the United States occurred there. In fact, 4 of them occurred there between 1811 and 1812. We are pretty much ignorant as to why. We're not sure why such large earthquakes occur in the middle of the continent. I just have to plead ignorant.
No problem, because nobody knows. So if you don't know, it's better to say I don't know.
That's right.
But again, it's been a long time, right? So again, the feeling that, it's like the pressure is building. Or is that not a proper way to look at it? Is the pressure always building, or are some areas almost dormant for really, really long periods?
Well, the center of the continents are very, very stable. Like in North America, if you go to Canada, those are very stable platforms, and they're known as cratons. But almost all the geologic activity occurs on the plate boundaries. So along the west coast of North and South America, Japan, Indonesia, that's where almost all of the geologic activity is going on, earthquakes and volcanoes.
Why?
Oh, that's because of the motion of the tectonic plates. As they move across the surface of the Earth, and we live on a sphere, they collide with each other, and it's that collision that's producing the earthquake.
So there's really no way to. I know scientists are working at it really hard in California, but there's no way to predict earthquakes, is there?
No one has predicted an earthquake yet, and we're not sure if it's possible. If I could step back, probably the biggest question in seismology today is exactly what is a big earthquake? Meaning, is a big earthquake like what happened in Japan? Is it a small earthquake that just got very big, or was it a large segment of the plate boundary that moved all together? And the physics of that is very different. If it's a matter that it's a small earthquake that grew big, there's lots of small earthquakes all the time, and we will never be able to predict large earthquakes. But if it's the other case, that a big earthquake actually starts off different, like a whole sliding, then it's possible. And people are frantically trying to answer that question, because they know that's the key, whether it's even possible to predict.
Okay, maybe this is the wrong way to think of it, but on a mountain, if you've got a pretty big rock, if that rock starts falling down the mountain, it can either go down pretty well unmolested and maybe block a road at the bottom, or it can hit a million other rocks on the way down, and you've got a total landslide on your hands. Down deep in the earth, is there an equivalent to that? I mean, you said a small earthquake might cause a big one. That's kind of what put that in my head.
That's exactly right.
Oh.
That's perfect. If it's a matter that it's a small earthquake that grew big, people refer to that as the cascade model of a large earthquake. And it's exactly that. You get a small earthquake that causes more small earthquakes, and they just cascade down, and they produce this huge one. And so that's one of the models for a large earthquake. But we're not sure if it's the correct physics yet.
So conceivably, man is getting pretty powerful now. We could do something that would be powerful enough to cause an earthquake. I am just over the mountain here from where they set off the nuclear weapons when they were testing them above and then below ground. And I remember being on the air in Las Vegas and having to warn people because, boy, I'll tell you, Vegas would rock and roll when they set one of those things off.
Oh, right. And one thing about large earthquakes, we don't know what triggers them. And one thing we know about them is that they apparently are very hard to start. For example, one of the largest atomic blasts was in about 1971 or so, up in the Aleutians.
Right.
And it was the equivalent of like a magnitude 6 earthquake. And there was concern, especially in Japan, that this was going to set off a whole series of quakes, but it didn't. And so this whole notion of triggering a big earthquake is right at the core of of the science of seismology, and people continue to argue with great passion as to what is the physics of a big earthquake.
Indeed. I could ask, if you were to set off a nuclear weapon with a pretty big yield somewhere on the San Andreas, do you think that has a chance of triggering the whole mess?
No. It's just not putting enough energy in the ground to do that, or the right type of energy.
So, in other words, even hydrogen bombs, even hydrogen bombs are small energy compared to a big earthquake.
Yeah, it has to do with the way that the energy gets put into the earth. Because an explosion is sort of like an impulse. An earthquake is like a sliding. And so if you had a bomb that could actually slide things, it might do it.
Let me tell you.
A bomb isn't like that. The physics is very different.
I see. All right. Let me tell you, your mic is so good, Doctor, and I know you're in Hawaii,
right?
That I hear a bird in the background.
Yeah. The sun is just going down, and that's when the birds start to chirp.
Oh, I bet it's gorgeous.
It's beautiful in Hawaii every day.
Well, I hear that. I very nearly moved recently. I had this ham radio friend who had this gorgeous property up on a hill down on the Big Island. And the only thing that stopped me was interesting because it was coming out of the ground. And I'm talking about the volcanic stuff. I forget what they call it, but it's actually a pretty severe factor. Depending where on the Big Island you are, it fools with air quality. No question about it.
Well, that's right. It certainly puts a lot of smoke in the air.
I think they call it VOG.
That's right, VOG, for a volcanic fog.
Right.
And that usually blows with the trade winds. So it blows away from where I am. But it's a beautiful island. The volcanoes are one of the intriguing things.
Oh, it's gorgeous.
And there are and from my house, I can see both Kilauea, which I live on in Mauna Loa, and I actually saw both of them erupt simultaneously when I was in bed one morning.
Oh, and that didn't move you away, huh? You didn't move away.
Oh no! If anything, people come here for eruptions. The eruptions are spectacular. I've never seen anybody not be awed the first time when they see molten rock.
Well, I can tell you one who's not awed. I'm married to a Filipina gal, and I lived in the Philippines for a long time. We were in Manila, and we got news that the Mayan volcano was erupting. And I said, come on, hun, let's get in the car and go down there. I want to see this. And I could not get her to budge. I think she's genetically disinclined to go to an erupting volcano.
That's the initial response, certainly, and the ones in the Philippines are the ones which explode.
They do.
The ones here in Hawaii are not. Good
point. Very good point. At any rate, I could not get her to budge. She wasn't going to go, and so we never did end up going. But the Mayan volcano was going pretty well there for a while, and it was getting scary, and they were beginning to, make people move away and safety areas and all that sort of thing. But I wanted to go. So I guess you're probably very much like me. You want to see it.
Oh, yes. Yes, I'm very intrigued. I'm attracted to the parts of nature which are dynamic. I'm attracted to storms, earthquakes,
me too.
Volcanoes.
I chase tornadoes. Or no, I did earlier in my life.
Oh, you did?
Oh, heavens, yes. Amarillo, Texas, friend of mine and I used to get in a little Volkswagen. How dumb is that? And we would chase these giant storms all the way sometimes into Oklahoma, take video and sell it to the TV station there in Amarillo. And so I love it. I love violent anything. But, I married a gal who's somehow got it in her genetic structure to stay away from volcanoes. Can't blame her.
Mm-hmm.
So I love that kind of thing. So in that, we share something. So with regard to earthquake prediction, it's a no. I mean, there was some guy in California who predicted 98% chance or something like that of one in Northern California, and it never came off.
Yes, there's been a whole series of people attempting to predict one.
All right. So people are failing at predicting. Now, here's the other question. What about animals? Jim Birkeland is famous for watching the newspaper for missing, lost animals because he thinks they run away before earthquakes.
Yes, I'm very familiar with Jim Birkeland, but no one has ever used animals to predict earthquakes. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence, but there's no scientific. And what I mean about that, in order to have scientific evidence for anything, it has to be consistent. You have to have other supportive evidence for it. At some point, you have to come up with a mechanism for it, and you have to be able to use it to sort of predict what's going to happen. And the problem with using animals is that people tell me that their dog, horse, cat ran away, or they came back, or it got active, or it fell asleep, and all that is inconsistent. And that's been the fundamental problem with animal predictions. And people have looked at over 100 different species, and there's just is nothing consistent about it.
Okay, so really, when you boil everything you've said down, we just don't understand earthquakes. We don't understand them to the point that we can predict them at all. Fair?
That's right, and we don't even know if the physics of large earthquakes even permit it. For example, scientists talk about something being non-deterministic, or it is determined. For example, the orbit of the moon is determined, and I can tell you when an eclipse is going to happen. All that is deterministic. Earthquakes seem to be non-deterministic, which means we may not have any hope of predicting them.
I know
that's just the physics of it.
Right. They've set up lasers looking across mountain ranges and looked for movement, and they've done all these different things, and so you just can't predict.
It certainly isn't possible today.
All right. Sort of then on to volcanoes. I do have a fear of Yellowstone. Yellowstone, I've seen predictions of what would happen if Yellowstone blew up, and they're not good at all.
Well, let me say, I've never met a volcano I didn't like.
Even Yellowstone?
I find them intriguing. The ones at Yellowstone with the boiling pots, the geysers.
Oh, that's cool, yeah.
And even looking at the debris from the last major eruptions, all of that is very spectacular.
That said, if the caldera, boom, blew up, what would happen?
Well, the main effect, of course, is the tremendous amount of ash,
yes,
which will go. I don't recall exactly what the maps are, but if you're within 50 miles or so, you'll probably have 3 to 4 feet of ash. And even as far as New York, you'll probably have something like 1/10 of an inch of ash. That will certainly raise havoc to transportation and the farmland and so forth, the economy. But such a thing is extremely unlikely.
Good. Honestly, good. Now, again, I've got a lot of Northwest listeners, and of course, they're very concerned about Mount St. Helens with good reason.
Right. I was at Mount St. Helens in 1980.
You were there?
Oh, yes.
Oh, my.
That's when I started my career. I couldn't believe my great fortune.
Well, from our perspective, I understand your statement. Most people would go, "Oh, really? Great fortune?"
Well, the eruption was spectacular, and dealing with putting in instruments, standing on the ground as it shakes like Jell-O, and just to be. Well, the one that I was close to was not St. Helens. It was one down in Indonesia, just less than a mile away when it blew up, and that was the
goodness.
The night that my life changed. It was an epiphany to me when I was just within a mile or two of this volcano exploding, and I had just been in the crater a couple hours earlier. It was a spectacular sight.
You had just been in the crater.
Yes, we had just gone in the crater. This was Galunga. I doubt if people remember when it exploded in 1982. We were actually at the top of a volcano called Merapi, 50 miles away, during its first explosion.
Right.
And then we got in Land Rovers and we rushed over there as fast as we could.
You do realize you're describing things with a sort of I don't know, a zealot's excitement about how cool it is. Most things that people would move away from, run from. So it's kind of interesting to listen to. I understand it.
If you could promise me one thing.
Yes, sir.
Don't tell my mother. Okay?
But have you described these things to your mom?
Never.
Oh, really?
Oh, she said, well, what did you do? I said, well, I had dinner, and then we all went to bed. I mean, it was just a quiet night, Mom. But anyway.
All right, we're at a break point, that break point I told you about. We'll be right back. This is Midnight in the Desert with Dr. Dvorak.